There are people who live with a quiet delay inside them. Not because they don't care, but because something in them can't move until the world begins to close in around them. They wait. They think. They plan in their minds, rehearsing life like a movie still in production. Days slip by like warm water through open fingers. And somehow, they always seem to begin only when there is no more room left to wait, as if urgency is the only oxygen they know how to breathe. To others, this delay looks careless, lazy, irresponsible. But beneath that hesitation is a deeper psychology, a story about fear, identity, protection, and the strange comfort of the final hour. This is not about time management. It is about the quiet battles hidden behind the pause. There is a moment before the beginning that feels heavier than most endings. A quiet pause. A hesitation that stretches itself across hours, days, sometimes entire seasons of life. Many people live inside this pause, even when they desperately want to move forward. The world sees them frozen, but inside, they are overflowing with anticipation, like runners who never hear the starting gun. They wake up with intentions. Clear plans. Thoughts that map out entire futures. They tell themselves, "I'll start today." And for a brief second, they believe it. The energy is real in their mind, but something unspoken makes their body slow down. The task feels larger than life. Their thoughts keep searching for the perfect moment to begin, a moment that never arrives. And gradually, the day dissolves into small distractions, picking up the phone, rearranging a desk, staring at blank screens. It may look effortless from the outside, but internally, they are wrestling with an invisible force. People often label this delay as laziness. They imagine apathy, a lack of ambition, a refusal to care. But those who procrastinate to the very last moment do not live without desire. They care, sometimes too much. They want the outcome so deeply that starting becomes frightening. The idea of doing it wrong feels unbearable. The thought of not living up to the version they imagined becomes a quiet threat. And so they wait, not to avoid the task, but to avoid the pain that might come with trying. There's a shame hidden in this type of delay. A private embarrassment that makes people turn inward. They don't speak openly about their hesitation. They don't show others their internal battles. They simply carry it. It weighs on them like an unspoken deadline that never stops breathing down their neck. The shame grows louder as time passes, becoming another reason not to begin. The more they want to start, the harder it becomes to take even the smallest step. Inside their mind, they often replay the same justification again and again. "I'll do it when I feel ready. When the timing is right. When I have more focus." These thoughts sound reasonable, even intelligent, but beneath them is a quiet fear. A fear of vulnerability. A fear of being seen trying and not thriving. A fear that the result might not match the dream. For some, the only time the fear loosens its grip is when the clock runs out, when consequences replace possibilities. When they're cornered by urgency, something shifts. They no longer have time to worry about being perfect, impressive, or right. All that remains is survival. And oddly, this urgency can feel liberating. The brain stops negotiating and simply acts. Work flows quickly, fiercely, sometimes brilliantly. People outside might think they perform best under pressure. But the truth is simpler. Pressure turns fear into necessity, and necessity leaves no room for hesitation. Yet, this relief is temporary. Once the task ends, the cycle resets. They promise themselves it won't happen again. They feel exhausted, relieved, ashamed, maybe even proud, a confusing blend of emotions only they fully understand. And then another task appears, another beginning invites them, and the silent wait returns, waiting to pull them back into the pause. This delay is not a flaw in character. It is an emotional protection mechanism misunderstood as carelessness. Behind every late start is a heart afraid of missteps, a mind tangled in expectations, and a nervous system conditioned to react only when the world leaves no time to think. Before the story moves into origins, it must be said gently. People who struggle to begin are not avoiding the work. they are protecting themselves from the pain they imagine might follow it. No one wakes up one day and chooses to wait until time collapses around them. The hesitation comes from somewhere. It is shaped quietly, long before adulthood, long before deadlines and responsibilities become everyday realities. The fear of starting has roots that often reach back into childhood, into moments where trying did not feel safe. For many, the earliest lessons about effort were tangled with judgment. A child shows their work with excitement, only to meet disapproval, correction, or a sigh that says, "You could have done better." They begin to learn that trying is dangerous, because trying exposes them to criticism. In those small moments, the brain connects effort with vulnerability. It associates beginning with the possibility of being wrong. Others grow up praised only when they excel. Not for attempting, experimenting, or exploring, but for producing something impressive. The message is quiet but powerful: you are worthy only when you do things exceptionally well. A child who hears this enough times learns to equate identity with achievement. Their self-worth becomes conditional. And when effort determines value, starting becomes terrifying. Because each task becomes a test of who they are. Some children experience the opposite, environments filled with unpredictability. Perhaps their caregivers were harsh one day and indifferent the next. Perhaps failure was punished, or perfection was expected without explanation. In such places, the safest choice was often to wait, observe, and avoid error. Doing nothing became a shield. Delay became protection. They learned to study the environment first, to wait until they could guarantee their moves were correct. It worked in childhood. It helped them survive emotionally. But what once protected them now stands in their way. Then there are those who were pressured early to be responsible. The talented one. The smart one. The child who was told they would go far, who was admired for potential more than process. When praised for who they could become, rather than who they are, they develop a strange burden. Every step feels heavy with expectation. People believe they can do great things, but being great then becomes the minimum. And so the delay begins. If starting might prove they are not as capable as others think, is it safer not to start at all? Even subtle emotional experiences can shape this pattern. A parent who completed tasks for them to make it easier. A teacher who mocked mistakes in front of the class. A sibling who always outshined them. A family where rest was criticized, or perfection was praised as virtue. These seemingly ordinary moments accumulate, quietly training the nervous system to fear beginning. The child becomes an adult, but the emotional rules remain. They carry invisible instructions. Don't make mistakes. Don't disappoint anyone. Don't try unless you can win. Don't risk being ordinary. And so, the grown-up version of that child waits. They wait for clarity, for inspiration, for certainty. They wait for the moment when they feel capable enough, perfect enough, safe enough to begin. But that moment never arrives. It cannot arrive, because the child within them still fears the consequences of trying. No one sees this inner child when they look at an adult struggling to start a task. They only see a late project, a missed opportunity, a last-minute rush. They do not see that the delay is a defense mechanism born from years of emotional conditioning. A person waiting to protect their sense of worth. If their early experiences had taught them that effort was safe, mistakes were normal, and value was not tied to performance, starting might feel ordinary. But for many, starting became a risk. Not just a risk of failure, but a risk of being seen. A risk of losing the fragile identity they built to survive. Before any change is possible, this truth must be acknowledged with softness. Procrastination began as protection. It was once a child's way of staying safe in a world measured by performance. To outsiders, the last-minute sprint looks reckless. Chaotic. Unplanned. But the human mind rarely acts without reason. When someone waits until urgency forces action, their brain is following a deeply wired, emotional logic. Procrastination isn't simply about avoiding tasks. It is about regulating feelings. When a person considers starting something important, their mind activates a network linked to threat detection. the brain doesn't see a project or goal. It sees potential judgment, imperfection, disappointment. The task becomes emotionally loaded, something that could trigger rejection or failure. And so, the brain protects itself in the only way it knows: it shifts attention elsewhere. Avoidance is not a lack of caring. It is a coping strategy. Neuroscientists describe this as emotional task aversion, where the discomfort associated with beginning outweighs the imagined rewards of finishing. The mind escapes by distracting itself. The nervous system avoids the anxiety that comes from doing something uncertain. But time changes everything. When the deadline looms, another psychological force takes over. Stress hormones rise. The sympathetic nervous system, responsible for the fight-or-flight response, begins to activate. Most people assume stress is harmful, yet in specific moments, the body uses it as fuel. Under pressure, the brain shifts focus from fear to survival. It stops worrying about perfection and prioritizes completion. This is where the rush becomes strangely energizing. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, surges when urgency creates a high-stakes environment. The task suddenly feels doable. Even exciting. The mind that once hesitated now feels flooded with clarity. Thoughts sharpen. Decisions come faster. Creative leaps happen without overthinking. Many people unknowingly train themselves to rely on this intensity. They feel most competent when the clock is running out. And so, a pattern forms. They wait. Stress rises. Focus appears. Action happens. The last-minute rush becomes a sedative and stimulant at the same time, numbing fear while fueling performance. But beneath the relief lies a trap. The brain learns to depend on pressure as the only gateway to productivity. It never learns how to begin without crisis. This conditioning reinforces itself over time. The nervous system assumes that urgency is necessary. A person might even feel empty or unfocused when they try to start early. The work feels dull, pointless, or emotionally overwhelming. Their mind searches for pressure, because pressure has become the only way to bypass fear. Another psychological layer deepens the cycle: self-worth tied to outcomes. When identity is connected to achievement, the stakes of a task feel enormous. The person senses that their value is being evaluated through the result. So they delay, using time as a protective shield. If they start late and fail, they can say, "I didn't have enough time." If they succeed, they seem talented. This dynamic becomes an unconscious negotiation of identity. Procrastination becomes a strategy to protect their sense of self. Thus, the last-minute rush is not irresponsible. It is a fragile equation of fear, stress, identity, and chemistry. A person is not motivated by pressure alone, they are liberated by it. Pressure silences the inner critic. It removes the need to be exceptional. It allows the mind to act without negotiating worthiness. Understanding this makes one truth clear. People who start too late are not addicted to chaos. They are dependent on relief, a relief that arrives only when urgency outweighs fear. Before exploring the internal tug-of-war that keeps them stuck, it must be recognized. Procrastination is not a problem of time. It is a relationship with discomfort, shaped by the brain, reinforced by emotion, and relieved only when the clock demands action. There is a peculiar tension that lives inside people who wait until it's almost too late. They are not indifferent. They are not reckless. They are caught between two strong forces, a genuine desire to begin, and a powerful instinct to avoid anything that feels emotionally risky. They carry ambitions in their minds, yet their bodies stall as if the simplest action might expose something fragile inside them. This conflict is not loud, not dramatic. It is quiet, private, and deeply personal. It feels like sitting behind an invisible glass wall, seeing what needs to be done, knowing how to do it, even wanting to do it, and yet feeling unable to move toward it. The person watches time pass, fully aware, yet unable to cross the emotional threshold of starting. Inside this conflict lives a constant dialogue. One voice pushes forward. "You should begin. You'll feel better once you start." You don't want to regret this later. Another voice resists with equal strength. It might not be good enough. What if you fail? What if you disappoint yourself? What if this proves you're not who you thought you were? The body listens to the fearful voice more than the hopeful one. Avoidance wins. Not because the person chooses it, but because fear feels like truth. Fear sounds logical. Fear promises temporary comfort. And so, the mind negotiates with itself, promising to start tomorrow, later, after lunch, after a break, after inspiration. The delay becomes a compromise between desire and dread. With each delay, guilt enters the scene. Guilt grows slowly, like fog settling over the mind. It whispers, "You're wasting time. You said you'd change. You should have started by now." And yet, guilt does not motivate. It weighs the mind down even more. Shame soon follows, turning inward like a sharp blade. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just do it? Everyone else seems capable. Shame is not a motivator. It paralyzes. It convinces the person that their hesitation reflects a flaw in their character. And so, the struggle intensifies. The more they desire progress, the more shame they feel for not achieving it, and the heavier the start becomes. The cycle loops again and again. Distraction becomes a temporary escape. Scrolling, cleaning, daydreaming, organizing, talking about plans instead of acting on them. These behaviors offer short-lived comfort. They silence the discomfort for a moment, but afterward, the quiet guilt returns, stronger than before. Because beneath every distraction is the knowledge that the work is still waiting. Yet, there is something important to understand. This person does not lack discipline. They lack emotional safety. They are not avoiding tasks. They are avoiding feelings tied to those tasks. Their nervous system has learned that beginning means exposure, exposure to being judged, being imperfect, being average, being wrong, being seen. And so, their body protects them the only way it knows, by holding still. Not starting becomes self-preservation. Ironically, this self-protection eventually creates self-punishment. The later they begin, the more they suffer. The inner critic becomes louder. The panic becomes stronger. The last-minute rush becomes inevitable. And once again, they manage to finish, but the relief is mixed with exhaustion, regret, and the promise that next time will be different. This internal battle is not laziness. It is a war between longing and fear. Between potential and vulnerability. Between the dream of who someone could be and the terror of proving themselves wrong. Before anything can change, the mind must stop confusing hesitation with failure. The delay is not a moral weakness. It is a signal that something inside does not feel safe enough to begin. The chapter ends with this quiet truth. People who struggle to start are not lacking willpower. They are longing for the courage to feel safe in their own effort. There comes a moment when waiting no longer feels protective. A moment when the pause grows sharp and heavy, like a reminder instead of a shield. The person who once felt safer not beginning starts to feel trapped by their own hesitation. The clock, which once offered mercy by delaying pressure, begins to turn against them. Deadlines that used to feel distant suddenly loom over every thought. Time compresses, narrowing into something unforgiving. The mind, which once searched for the perfect moment to begin, realizes it has run out of moments. And in this scarcity, something shifts. The emotional logic of delay begins to crack. They recognize that waiting is not postponing discomfort anymore. It is creating more of it. The fear that once protected them now amplifies their suffering. Stress is no longer a motivator, it becomes a weight, a constant pulse of anxiety. They feel their heart race not because they are inspired to act, but because they are afraid of what will happen if they don't. This is the turning point. Not a dramatic revelation, but a quiet emotional realization. Doing nothing is no longer safe. It arrives in small ways. A missed opportunity. An apology they notice themselves repeating. A dream that remains unrealized year after year. A project finished but with exhaustion instead of satisfaction. Perhaps someone they admire moves forward with something imperfect yet honest, and they feel a mix of admiration and grief. They notice how quickly time moves, how it keeps moving whether they participate or not. They realize that waiting for confidence never made them confident. Waiting for readiness never made them ready. Waiting for the right moment only left them with fewer moments to choose from. The person begins to see that their hesitation isn't protecting them from failure. It is preventing them from living fully. The fear of trying has cost them something deeper than mistakes. It has cost them presence, participation, possibility. There is often a quiet grief in this realization. A mourning of the versions of themselves they never got to meet, the one who wrote the story, pursued the idea, practiced the skill, built the dream, took the risk. A grief for the time they spent waiting to feel worthy of beginning. A grief for the years their identity was defended instead of expressed. But alongside grief is tenderness. They begin to understand why they waited, the childhood conditioning, the emotional cost, the nervous system that believed it was protecting them. Compassion begins to replace shame, not as an excuse, but as a recognition of what was once necessary for survival. In that understanding, the clock is no longer an enemy. It becomes a mirror. It reflects a truth not about time running out, but about life being something that happens in real moments, not imagined potential. They see that every beginning is imperfect. That no amount of waiting guarantees success. That growth does not require readiness, only participation. The turning point is not when urgency forces them to act. It is when they no longer want urgency to be the only reason they act. They start to desire a different relationship with effort, one that isn't fueled by panic, shame, or pressure. They want to create from honesty instead of emergency. They begin to long for peace in the process, not just relief in the result. This shift is subtle yet profound. It is the moment a person decides that fear can exist without being their guide. That time deserves partnership, not dependence. That beginnings do not need to be earned, they simply need to be chosen. And so, a new possibility forms. To act not because the clock demands it, but because their life deserves it. Healing does not begin with discipline. It does not begin with schedules, systems, or block calendars. Those can help, but they are not the root. Healing begins when effort becomes safe, when starting is no longer treated like a test of identity. For someone who has spent their life delaying until pressure rescues them, the real transformation happens quietly. Not in a dramatic burst of motivation, but in gentle permission. The permission to start small. The permission to begin imperfectly. The permission to exist in the process, not just the outcome. This is where a person learns a different kind of emotional rhythm. The goal is no longer to perform, but to participate. No longer to impress, but to engage. They begin to understand that beginnings do not need to be grand, confident, or precise. A beginning can be clumsy, fragmented, unsure. It can feel uncomfortable and still be valid. The nervous system, once trained to panic before acting, needs time to relearn safety. It needs repetition, not intensity. It needs softness, not pressure. Starting must become ordinary before it can feel natural. And ordinary begins with the smallest steps, opening the laptop without working, writing 2 sentences instead of a page, sketching a messy idea instead of finalizing it. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of repair. To someone used to performing under crisis, these small actions may feel pointless. The brain craves the dopamine of urgency, the thrill of survival mode productivity. But slowly, through repetition, the body learns another source of energy, quiet consistency. This consistency may not feel exciting. That is the point. It teaches the body that action does not have to be dramatic to matter. Emotional safety is built through experience. When a person begins imperfectly and nothing terrible happens, when no one judges them, when they do not feel worthless for being average, when they remain safe in their own effort, the brain begins to loosen its grip. It starts to unlink effort from danger. This is the beginning of healing, not working harder, but working without fear breathing down their neck. Another shift occurs when a person separates who they are from what they produce. They begin to see effort as expression, something human rather than evaluative. Identity stops being measured by accomplishments and starts being witnessed in movement, curiosity, exploration. They slowly reclaim the right to try without being defined by results. This healing is subtle. There is no applause for starting 5 minutes early. No trophy for writing one imperfect paragraph. No celebration for choosing process over panic. But the nervous system remembers these moments. Each small beginning becomes evidence that life can unfold gently. Eventually, urgency loses its power as the only motivator. The person no longer needs fear to act. Their inner critic becomes less threatening, their body less reactive. They start to work not to prove something, but to participate in their own becoming. They begin to recognize that life is shaped by involvement, not performance. And even when fear returns, because it does, they now know it can be present without controlling them. Fear becomes a feeling, not a barrier. Discomfort becomes a signal, not a stop sign. They no longer wait for clarity or confidence before they begin. They start while uncertain, because the beginning itself is what brings clarity. Healing is not about finishing early, or being organized, or becoming perfectly disciplined. Healing is found in the quiet bravery of beginning earlier than fear wants them to. It is found in showing up without crisis. In trying without urgency. In choosing effort not as a measure of worth, but as a way of living. The greatest shift is this. They no longer start because time is running out. They start because they are finally allowed to be human in the process. There is a gentle courage in beginning before the world forces you to. No applause. No urgency. No countdown pushing you forward. Just the quiet decision to take part in your own life while time is still spacious, while the moment is still open. Starting early doesn't look heroic. It is often invisible. No one sees what could have happened if you waited. No one knows that fear wanted to speak louder. The only witnesses are your own thoughts, the ones that used to hold you hostage, now learning to soften. You begin without spectacle, without crisis. You begin simply because you can. And in that early beginning, a different relationship with time quietly forms. Time no longer feels like a predator chasing you or a rescuer saving you. It becomes a companion. A partner that walks alongside you instead of against you. You no longer beg it for mercy or wait for it to pressure you into action. You meet it halfway. You participate with it instead of reacting to it. In this space, effort has room to breathe. Ideas unfold without panic. Work becomes an exploration instead of a test. The mind, which once tightened under pressure, has the chance to wander, to experiment, to enjoy even the imperfect attempts. Starting early doesn't guarantee success. But it allows growth to happen gently rather than painfully. Imagine a life where creativity isn't born from fear, but from curiosity. Where productivity isn't forced by crisis, but nourished by presence. Where progress is not rushed, but revealed, slowly, with patience. Beginning early offers room for mistakes that don't feel fatal, adjustments that aren't rushed, learning that doesn't feel humiliating. When mistakes are allowed to unfold without the sting of urgency, they lose their power. They become information instead of threats. This is a quieter kind of bravery. Not the type that conquers mountains or battles dragons. It is the courage to show up when no one is asking you to. The courage to act without external pressure. The courage to risk mediocrity, to risk being ordinary, to risk being simply human while you try. For someone who has lived dependent on adrenaline and deadlines, this bravery is subtle but profound. It rewrites how effort feels inside the body. It replaces panic with intention. It replaces shame with permission. It replaces pressure with patience. The mind learns that beginnings do not demand perfection, only presence. There will still be days when fear tries to return to its old throne. Days when delay whispers familiar comforts. Days when the instinct to wait feels safer than the vulnerability of starting. But the difference now is awareness. The person who once couldn't begin without pressure has learned something priceless: fear can exist without being followed. They begin anyway, not because they feel ready, but because they no longer wait for readiness to define their worth. They begin because they have chosen a gentler way to live. A way that honors effort over achievement, curiosity over performance, participation over perfection. Starting early becomes an act of self-respect, a way of saying, I deserve time to grow. I deserve room to try. I deserve to create without fear as my supervisor. And slowly, life changes shape. Not through sudden breakthroughs, but through accumulated presence. Through the simple habit of meeting the moment with participation instead of panic. Through letting work unfold at a human pace. In this gentle rhythm, a new identity forms. Not the identity defined by potential or performance, but one shaped by participation. A person who belongs to their own effort. A person who starts not because they are forced to, but because they finally trust themselves enough to enter their life while the door is still open. This is the quiet bravery of starting early. Not louder than fear. Just softer, and strong enough to begin.